Hello and welcome to episode 23 of 50 Women Over 50, a podcast for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie. In this podcast series, I'm interviewing 50 women from all walks of life who are over 50 years of age about what they've learned by this decade so that we can all learn from them. Today, I'm welcoming to the show a woman whose life took a whole new turn the year she turned 50. She had never been to university and she wanted to try it. And within a few years, she'd earned a PhD, and she's now an assistant professor at the University of Alberta. Please welcome author Norma Dunning, whose story collection, Tainna, won the Governor General's Award for English Fiction in 2021. Her latest book, Kinauvit, which translates from the Inuk language, What's Your Name?, is an examination of Canada's Eskimo disc system and how it impacted Norma's own family.
So I've been really looking forward to speaking to you because I've noticed that, based on what I've learned about you, you have a life of two halves, right? Your life before you're 50 and the life after you're 50.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the year that you turned 50. How did you celebrate your birthday? And tell me what happened that changed in your life that year.
Oh, you know what? 50 was quite a long time ago for me now.
Mm-hmm.
And it really truly is. But what I recall is that day I went to morning mass or day mass at my little tiny Catholic church close by. And I remember saying to God, I want to thank you for giving me 50 years, and they've been wonderful. And I had wonderful children, and I've had good work and opportunities. And I was just wondering, God, could I have another 50? Yeah, so that's what I recall. I've never made a fuss over my birthday ever.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is when I was coming out, I was the youngest. I'm not the youngest. I'm the youngest girl.
Yes.
I have two sisters and three brothers. And my mother loved my birthday. And she would invite all the kids on the block, and she would bake cakes and get all these games ready. Back in the day where you actually did not play a game that was on a screen. And I was always so shy, and I just dreaded it. I hated my birthday.
Yeah, I kind of hear you on that. I find that the more of them that I have, the less I want to celebrate them. So
inside of my head, I celebrate them. And I always will make sure I have a very good piece of cake.
Oh, nice.
On that day, I will make sure of that. But otherwise, it's just a quiet kind of day.
But the year you turned 50 is the year that you decided to go back to school and you went to university.
I did. And I'd never been. I'd done night courses, but nothing at a university level.
Yeah.
And prior to going to university, I worked in logistics. So I moved people's freight around the world. Right. And I did work for some very kind companies, but I had ended up unemployed. I never had been unemployed. And at first, I really loved it. I'd get up in the morning and go have the early morning swim, and then come home and shower and look out my window and think, look at all the people going to work. Not me. I decided that I would give it a try. And when I initially went back to university, it was all based on whether or not the money would work out.
Yes.
And every year I would say to myself, well, if I can make it financially, I'll stay with it. And apparently I made it financially.
Right.
And after like 9.5 years, I had earned a BA, MA, and a PhD.
But what was it that compelled you at age 50 to go back and start all over in a whole new realm?
It was something that I always longed for, to have gone to university. I came up in a home where at that time, especially at that time, I think as well, the big thing was to finish grade 12.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, you have to go and get a job. And my mom used to say to me, Norma, you should go work in a bank. And I would say, Mom, I can barely count to 10. I hate numbers. I would the worst thing to ever walk into a bank. And she would say to me, but banks promote women. Anyhow, in all of that, I ended up doing an assortment of different jobs. I was never a stay-at-home mom. I never had that kind of financial security to be able to be at home and raise kids. I couldn't do that. And then I thought, I'm just going to go and give it a try and see what happens. But it was something that I had always wished I had done as a younger person. But I think I returned at the right time, at a time where I would take it seriously, at a time where I really appreciated many of the professors that I was able to sit in with. Because they're just a fountain of knowledge. And I just, it was a dream. Oh, that dream, it was a very long dream. It ended up being like a 9.5-year dream. And I'm glad I did it.
And before you went back into academia, were you always a poet?
Yes, I always wrote. I always wrote stories. I always wrote prose and poetry. For me, the goal at that time was not to publish, but to write. And it was something that I've always done. I never really had that desire to publish until I had grandchildren. And things become different, and you, I know you understand, it's like your values shift. And for me, it became important that they knew their history.
Yes. So you became a grandmother around the time you turned 50 as well?
That's right. My oldest grandson he is now 9. He'll be 10 in July.
Yeah,
so
and then
time that I was in school, then Joe came along. And I always say, I never thought I'd fall in love again until Joe came along. And he's everything for me. And even though I have all these other grandchildren, but he was the first one.
Yes.
You start to think about what kind of legacy do you leave behind? What do I leave for my grandchildren? And that's what prompted me to begin to think about publishing.
And publish you did. Tell me a little bit about your first book.
My first book was Annie Muktuk and Other Stories. And when you open it up, the dedication says, "For my ancestors, I wrote your words with my heart." And it really is a dedication to my mother and all of my Inuit ancestors. And then the second book was a book of poetry, Eskimo Pie, and it's looking at Inuit identity. And then Tainna came along, and that was the second collection of short stories. And then, because of COVID and how publishing houses had to, they couldn't, public printing shops had to shut down through the pandemic. So publishing houses, they ended up having their schedules rearranged and bumped back. And So in November of 2022, my first work of nonfiction called Kinauvit, What's Your Name? And Kia, the other side. So Kinauvit looks at the Eskimo Identification Canada system, and Akia is a talkback to all the early explorers and anthropologists who came into Canada's north and described the Inuit in the worst of ways. So that collection of poetry was really it was an accumulation of all of the incredible documents I was able to read while a student at the U of A. I had access to old documents and old maps, and I was just so fortunate to be able to have that kind of time and to be able to read and think about things. So if you look at it, it's 5 books in 5 years.
Prolific. And you've won so many awards, including the Governor General's Award for literature. I mean, what was that like?
Very unexpected. I knew that Tainna was a very strong collection of stories. Did I think that an older Inuk woman would even shortlist? Not at all. No. So that was a complete surprise. And for me, it's a true validation of what I write and what I write about. And that's what mattered to me. And all I could say was, thank you, Canada. It's a very prestigious award to be able to carry. And I was just thrilled. I was just thrilled with all of it.
Well, you're certainly representing for many different identities, including us middle-aged women. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But I know that your books they've gone a lot further afield than just Canada, right? They've been translated into other languages and published around the world.
They have. That's really beautiful. Very, very beautiful. Annie Muktuk was translated. Annie Muktuk and Tainna have both translated into French through Mémoire d'un écrit in Montreal. But Tainna also will translate into North Macedonian. And then Eskimo Pie has translated English, French, and Greek. So my wonderful books get to walk around the world and talk to all kinds of people in languages I don't know.
I'm just wondering, like, how your stories, how they resonate for someone living in Athens or in Northern Macedonia or something. It's just so interesting that people around the world, that they're looking at Canada and they're looking at our various cultures. And I've traveled a lot. I've lived in other countries, and the people's view of Canadians is much different than what the reality of living in Canada is, in my opinion. Anyway, I feel like Canadian life is romanticized a lot. And so I love that your book is bringing like a certain element of our culture to the world, where they really don't, they think all we do is ski and go skidooing and things like that. So yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I was really fortunate through this past fall. I was on 26 planes in 16 weeks. So
oh my goodness.
Travel. And one place that I got to spend a beautiful weekend was Paris, France. So when I was there, it was this beautiful festival. It's called Festival America. And they bring over North Americans, so North and South American writers are invited. It was really amazing for me to be there, because what I started to understand, many of the audiences that I spoke to in Paris they had an understanding that their ancestors came into Canada, but it was like it stopped there. So their concepts of what colonization looked like and still looks like in Canada were almost, my perception was almost non-existent. So it's like, well, we went there and we made all of you people better.
Yeah.
But what that shows me, and I don't blame people, I blame curriculum. So here we are in Canada with many people who were so shocked in our country when the graves started to be found around residential school. And that shock, and I blame curriculum for that, and how government has, provincial or federal, has controlled what information goes out across Canada to our classroom. And so when I was in Paris, I started to think, but it's the same here in France, where the curriculum is lacking. It has a massive gap of what really went on in Canada.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Like, I raised my children in England, so it's kind of a similar thing there that they don't really, it's like we sent explorers over there and we had people go over to Canada and settle it. And then that's all that they learn in the schools over there about Canada's early years, really. And then this is what they've seen in the movies, which is not very close to anything.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I think though Canada, I like to think that we're always getting better in terms of our understanding of colonialism and how it exists today. Like how did it reshape itself? Because so many people think of it as an era in time, but it isn't. It's an ongoing set of thinking and a set of policy. And so when I was in Paris, one panel I sat on had a very informed moderator, and I really enjoyed him. And he asked very smart questions. But when he introduces me in French, and then he reads a passage from one of the stories, and then looks at me and says, "You're talking about racism. This is racism." And he was really agitated by it. And so that's when you start to think, you don't know. You don't know what happened after all those French people came here to Canada. You don't know the other side of the story.
Well, I think I'm with you in that things are changing. There is actually an awakening to these issues, and I feel that our young people especially care deeply about the ramifications of colonialism and what it's done over the centuries. And I'm actually kind of hopeful that they're going to try to make things right and change things.
It'll take a great deal of time. But I agree with you, because I do teach a required course for students who are studying to be a teacher. So through the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. And I've been teaching this course since 2015. But what I see is, as time has passed, there's less and less resistance to the information that the course that I deliver. There's less resistance to that information. And so when you say our young people, I agree with you that, that generation, I don't know if I'll see any amount of really big change in my lifetime, but I think they will in theirs.
Yes. Well, thanks to people like you. actually getting, doing the research and getting the stories out. So when I was preparing to talk to you today, it's the first time that I learned about the Eskimo disc system. I had no idea. So certainly nobody ever taught that to me. And I was deeply shocked that this existed in Canada. Why would anyone that would have thought that this system could have worked when it was so deeply flawed? It was never going to work. And the other thing that really was shocking to me was the timing of it, because it looks like the Eskimo disc system was coming into being right when the Second World War was raging. And we were sending tens of thousands of young people over to Europe to fight in a war because of the way that they were labeling and tattooing the Jewish people to try to liberate them. And here we were back at home, just starting to implement something very, very similar against one of our own populations. And not enough is known about this. I was shocked to learn this.
I think a lot of people are. I've spoken about this system since about 2014, and across Canada and into parts of the U.S. Yes. And people are kind of shocked and amazed by it. It's never been apologized for. I don't know if it ever will be. But because it had a personal implications for myself, I made application to the Nunavut Land Claim Agreement to become a member or a beneficiary of Nunavut. And when you're asked that question, and I mean, it's so ridiculous, because at the time that I'm making application, that system had been shut down for about 3 decades. So you can see the lasting effect that it had. But I mean, the system went so much deeper in terms of surveillance of a people. And all of it becomes so ingrained within the North that it somehow becomes normalized, because the parents recognize what that number held, and what it held was access to socioeconomic benefits that all other Canadians already had without a disc number. And so I think I was fortunate to be able to write that book. I was fortunate to be able to have the time to do the research and to really give thought to how that book would come together. I think Douglas McIntyre did a beautiful job with that book.
What are you working on now?
Now I actually have 2 fictional. I've decided I've not written a novel, so why not write 2 instead of 1 time? And so I've been working on 2 separate fictional novels, and I'm enjoying it. It's fun. It's fun.
And you don't have to answer to everybody on them, because it's your story.
But for me, it's always the same thing. It's always about when I get the time, and that's always the drawback. You're designating time, like dedicating time, where this is what I'm going to do for the full morning. I'm just going to write. And to me, like, let's say I get 3 hours to write, and if I produce 3 good pages in those 3 hours, that's a very good writing day.
Oh, okay. Good for you.
Takes time though.
And I know you're active with your grandchildren. You've got your day job at the university and all the other things involved with being a celebrated author, like all the publicity stuff that you have to do. It must be difficult to carve out some quiet time to be able to really do that deep work.
Well, that's why you get up early. I always think when you get older, you just don't sleep. So do something with that time that you wish you were sleeping.
Yes.
Yeah.
What advice would you give your 30-year-old self?
Oh, by then I have to think about it, because by then I would have had 3 of 4 sons, and I think I would have told myself to publish earlier, because I did not publish until I was 58.
Right.
And I kind of wish I had started a little bit earlier, but I always think that we are doing things when they should be done, and that we don't have that kind of control over. We like to think we do. Oh, I'm going to publish 2 novels in 2 years. No, you're probably not going to do that.
Right.
But I think when we start something new or recreate ourselves in some way, it's time. The time is right. And so I don't like to give myself too many regrets.
Yeah. You're right about that. You just, to a certain extent, life has to unfold the way it's going to unfold. You can't push it in some directions all the time. You have to just let life take its course.
That's right. Because it's going to anyway.
Yes.
So we fight it. And I say to my students, and they're all so young, I'll say to them, I hope not one of you gets out of bed one day and says, I know exactly who I am and what I want. And I tell them, if you do that, you're going to short yourself. Don't do it. Don't ever think that you have arrived, because not one of us are going to be lying on our deathbed and thinking, oh, thank God I bought a Lexus. Not one of us is going to do that. Instead, you'll be thinking about all the people that you have loved and all the people who have loved you back.
Yes.
And our whole lives are nothing but relationships. That's all of our life. That's the only thing that matters. And so as we're going through life, we're nurturing relationships, and that is just so very important. And that's the bottom line to all of it. Of why we're here, why we're breathing. It's about relationships.
You're so right. And I know personally it's only the last 10 years or so that I've really come to understand that. And I feel like it's just a part of reaching this stage of your life where you can see further behind you than you have ahead of you, and you start actually connecting the dots around that. But you're 100% right. I agree with you.
Well, maybe that's the advice I should have gave my 30-year-old self.
Yeah. And it's excellent advice. And what you say about not waking up and saying, I know who I am, and anyone who wakes up and says that, you're kidding yourself.
You are playing the best joke on yourself.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Oh, 10 years. My gosh, I'll be like 74. The good thing about being a professor is that you just teach until death. And that's the absolute truth in it. And as long as I have decent health and I love to travel, and I think I'll just keep on writing and keep on teaching and trying to contribute that little bit to make Canada understand the Inuit people a little bit better. And hopefully we will all be much more kind to one another.
I like to, at the end of these interviews, do a bit of a quick round just to get a bit of a snapshot of what your life is like beyond your work and your mission. So what are you reading? What are you watching? Are you binging a TV show? Like what are you doing to amuse yourself these days?
I am reading. I read Tannery Row, John Steinbeck.
Oh, great book.
meet him probably about every other year. To me, he was wonderful, wonderful writer. And I always think did not receive enough acclaim as a writer. And I love that book. I love the characters because they're all down on their luck. They're alcoholics. They're hookers. And they have this community and this life that they live in this little tiny area of Cannery Row. And I just love reading that. And I just finished binge watching Vikings 2. I really enjoyed the Vikings.
I don't think I know that one.
Oh, watch it.
Where did you watch it?
On good old Netflix. Netflix. The cocaine of the older woman. That live in front of it.
This has been 50 Women Over 50, a podcast for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. I want to thank my guest, author Norma Dunning, for joining me today and sharing with us her life lessons learned as an over 50 Inuit woman living and succeeding in colonial Canada. She is so right when she says our whole lives are about relationships and they're the only thing that really matters in the end. Such wise words. I invite you to see the show notes to find out more about Norma and her writing. And I've included links so that you can connect with her online. Join me again for next week's show when I will be welcoming Larissa Russell, who at age 50 was diagnosed with autism. She's an expert on healing through creativity, and she's a podcaster and an LGBTQ++ advocate and activist. That's next week. But in the meantime, please drop me a rating or a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's connect and create a whole community of wise women over 50 by sharing a link to this show with your friends and connections. See you next time on 50 Women Over 50. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie.